Hello, my name's Duncan and welcome to one of my hot takes. This hot take is about Mattock's axiom of uniform stress. Let's take a look. So, quickly, I need to explain the concept of the axiom of uniform stress. First, what is an axiom? It is a word we don't use in common parlance, so it's worth pointing out there are a few equivalents. One might say it's a rule, but it's probably better explained as a self-evident rule, a rule that is obviously true. Here, we're talking about a potential true rule of nature, of course. Second, the axiom of uniform stress is a concept that as a tree grows, it grows its structure such that there are no stress concentrations, that stresses are evenly distributed across the entire skeletal surface of the tree on its outer edges. Bear in mind that there are four stresses to consider here: compression, tension, torsion and shear. So this will be a complex and demanding structural arrangement for a tree to produce, with it having primary, secondary and tertiary branches, and likewise primary, secondary and tertiary roots that help to anchor the tree. This idea did not come out of nowhere. Research by Metzger in the late 19th century on forest trees in plantations found that the extent of wind loading on a forest tree helped to explain the taper of its main stem. Metzger theorized that this taper evened out stresses along the long stem of such a tree. Note that Metzger's idea did not extend into branches, roots, the bud of the tree, or any other structures that trees produce. So although one may approximate or estimate the likely stem taper of a forest tree or plantation tree from the typical force of the prevailing wind and the tree's wind drag, it's important to note that Mattock expanded this to a concept that supposedly covers all parts of the tree: branches, branch junctions, decaying hollow trees, and so on. At the time of publishing this concept in the early 1990s, Mattock claimed that this was a self-evident truth, but one which could never be proven to be the case. One must question why. Stresses can be calculated. Tree growth patterns can be measured. Why would it be impossible to prove such a thing? Well, this hot take highlights that both empirical evidence and logical thinking strongly disproves this axiom. Trees do not grow such that there are uniform stresses across all their outer surfaces, and on the next slide I'll take you through a few of the reasons why. So this is an important hot take because this idea of uniform stress fields around trees persists as theory still taught in arboriculture despite it being invalid. Let's get through key aspects of the argument as to why it is an invalid concept. As noted, this axiom has not been proven by science. Rather, there are multiple authors like Professor Carl Niklas that have theoretical papers that disprove this axiom. However, it's often better to focus on more practical papers that tested tree parts for a case like this. In which case, there's a good paper by Dr. Brian Kane that highlighted that damaged red maple stems that recovered from their wounds ended up capable of taking more bending stresses at their point of repair compared to other areas of their stems. Stresses were not evenly distributed in these recovered stems. Now, I have a paper published in our Arboricultural Journal in 2016, which is available to you on Canvas, that draws together several arguments as to why trees do not grow as per this axiom of uniform stress. One of these arguments is that it has been proven by scientists, a key author being Bruno Milliere, that plants respond to strain, not stress, and this shows that the tree could never gauge it had achieved a uniform stress field at its outer edge. Trees do not directly experience stresses, and it is proven that they respond to strains. I do recommend that you look through the other arguments in my paper, which include differing qualities of wood within a tree, understanding mechanical loading on trees, and that stress concentrations do occur at branch junctions in trees under common loading scenarios. The tree images here show four trees with large diameter stems but rather small crowns. Mechanical stresses will not be evenly distributed across the outer edges of these structures of these trees. The stem's shape and mass is such that the stems can take a great deal more bending stress before they fail, compared to any branch that helps to form the crowns of these trees. Note that the bottle tree in image C, which has a lot of adverse taper in its stem too, is also common in royal palms and a few other trees. To sum up, the taper of the stem of a conifer tree in a forestry plantation is somewhat predictable from the height of the crop and the extent of its local wind loading, and this fact has not changed since the 1890s. However, Mattock took this idea too far to spread the same concept to all trees and all component parts of all trees without any scientific evidence. This was extrapolating the original theory far too far. Essentially, it's wrong to think that trees grow such that they develop uniform stress fields at their outer edges. This would, in fact, be a very poor growth strategy for a tree to adopt. Probably the easiest argument to follow in my paper as to why this axiom is false is that when trees grow, they produce wood of different qualities in different parts of their structure. Wood density and bending strength can vary by over 50% in these tissues within the same tree. So if some wood can take much more stress, why does the tree bother to produce it in that way if stresses are always evenly spread across the tree structure? It doesn't make any sense. It would be highly illogical and highly wasteful of resources from the tree point of view. Trees are just not wasteful in that way. The image on this slide shows the butt of a mature tree, a lime tree. The white arrows are highlighting the outer edges of the buttresses that have grown. Again, clearly there will not be a uniform stress distribution in this tree's butt, whether under static loading or both static and dynamic loading. This is because the edges of the buttresses will experience far more bending stresses than the furrows or crevices that sit between them, examples of which are marked with black arrows in the image. However, the wood strength is much higher along the ridges of the buttresses than in the furrows, so it's not a flaw in the tree that there are higher stresses at the edges of the buttresses. Rather, it's a good example of biological adaptation. What this example does show, though, is that the idea of uniform stress fields in trees is false when we consider all component parts of a tree. Thanks for listening to my hot take. Talk again soon.